Hey everyone, and welcome to Get Your Geek On's Marvel Cinematic Universe Retrospective. I'm Robert, that's Aaron. We're here to talk movie by movie through the entire MCU Infinity Saga. 23 movies, 11 years.
So expect spoilers, guys, as we get into each movie, but we will start each video by letting you know whether we consider this as an essential movie for the overall MCU. Think of this as your guide in getting into the MCU.
Right. I mean, obviously, there's definitely a couple of filler movies in the entire 23 movies, but if you're a completionist like me, maybe you'll say, they're all essential. I haven't said that so far.
No.
All right, so this week we're talking about Thor: The Dark World, directed by Alan Taylor. It made $85 million opening weekend and $644 million over its run. The movie returns Chris Hemsworth as Thor. We've got Natalie Portman still returning as Jane Foster, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Anthony Hopkins as Odin, Rene Russo as Frigga, and introduces Christopher Eccleston as Malekith. Is this movie essential? Tell me.
I honestly believe, yes, it was essential. You got, in this one, I guess, spoiler though, at this point, we have two.
Yeah, we're in spoilers. Here we go.
So you have two Infinity Stones that they've talked about, and one of them debuts in this one. So
yeah, so they definitely do.
Is.
We get our first explicit mention of the Infinity Stones.
Yes.
Obviously, the first one in being the Ether that plays a major role in a storyline where we know that it's important, but we actually don't know until the very end of the movie that it's an Infinity Stone. Now, for me, I would actually say, even though this is the only movie that the Ether plays a major part in until Infinity War,
right.
I don't know that it's hard to call this an essential movie. Like, yes, we get Infinity Stones, and there's lines in other movies like Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor Ragnarok that reference what happens in this movie, but because, like, Thor Ragnarok is a perfect example for me. That movie has an in-universe play where they kind of recap the major events of this movie. Yeah. And so if you just watch Thor Ragnarok, you don't necessarily have to watch this one. And I think they give you enough backstory in Endgame for what's going on with the Ether that you don't necessarily need this movie. And I think this movie, there are definitely scenes in Avengers Endgame, specifically when they come back to this movie. Yeah. Spoiler for Avengers Endgame. That if you haven't seen this movie, it might play a little weird.
Yeah, but that's true.
But it's definitely important to his journey, for sure.
Oh, yeah, and I enjoyed it. It was a good movie still, I think, Yeah. It's interesting.
We'll talk about it. Yeah. What do you remember going into this movie? The hype for this movie, do you remember there being much?
I honestly don't remember there being that much for this one, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I know, so we have, like you said, Iron Man 3. We've had Avengers now. I remember had watched the first Thor. And I remember everyone was also happy when the first Thor came out because it was all, 3D. And it just, the whole movie to me, it was a good movie. Yeah. There were some off keys for, like, the looks to me. So I was kind of going in here with a little bit of a lower bar, to be honest. Because I was like, well, the first one wasn't great. It was good, but it wasn't great. Like you said, we just had Iron Man 3 and Avengers. Avengers, obviously, I loved. Iron Man 3, I was iffy with even back then. So now I want to say the bar wasn't high. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, and I remember going into this movie, I think the public was pretty hyped. You can tell because of all the money it made in November.
Oh God, yeah.
That's not a huge movie, blockbuster type of month. So it made a lot of money. I remember, for me, this was the movie. So coming off the Avengers that I had loved, and I loved Iron Man 3. I have a close friend that this was the movie that started our string. We go opening night, Thursday night, the preview night. We go, and since this movie, we haven't missed an MCU movie the rest of the time. So this, I will always remember, is Thor: The Dark World was the first one that started that string. I'd seen all the other movies in theaters, and most of them opening weekend, but this was like, preview night, we go, and we see MCU movies. So shout out to my friend, you know who you. So what about you? The first time you saw this movie, do you remember seeing it? Do you remember liking it? What do you remember about it?
To be honest, the only thing I remember about it was the end credits. Was the post-credit scene.
Yeah, which actually is The Collector.
Yes.
And that scene was directed by James Gunn.
Really?
the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, where that character plays a role. And actually, I remember at the time that caused a little bit of controversy. Alan Taylor, the director of this movie, who really hadn't done a lot of major features. He'd done a lot of work on like Game of Thrones. He'd done a lot of TV work, but hadn't done any major movie work.
Okay.
And he apparently was kind of upset that they brought in a different director to film a scene of his movie.
Yeah, it's
but
kind of odd.
At the end of the day, that scene really is more of a it's a postscript to this movie, but they're setting you up for the world of Guardians of the Galaxy, which comes out the next year. Yeah. Like it's pretty clear that that's what they're doing. So it makes total sense.
It does.
But yeah, he was a little upset about that.
And that's the only thing I really remember, because I remember watching them film and again being lackluster. I was just like, oh, it was okay.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt after that first run.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw this movie, like, I really liked the character of Thor. And I remember I liked this movie. I didn't like it as much as the first Thor. I didn't like it as much as, I think it was probably my least favorite of the MCU up to that point.
Okay.
But I still liked it. It wasn't like, oh, that was a crappy movie. It was more just like, oh, I really... And we'll kind of get into it with the plot. Like, I really was kind of like, it wasn't all it could have been. So, yeah, let's get into the plot.
Okay.
So, basically, mini recap here. Thor, after the first movie, he had to destroy the Rainbow Bridge. It has thrown the 9 realms into chaos. So, he's having to restore the 9 realms. Yes. The Rainbow Bridge has been rebuilt. And he's
duct tape and everything.
He's going around to restore order to the 9 realms, right? In that same time period, the convergence is happening, which is the alignment of all the realms, and the ether, which we've already touched on, being one of the Infinity Stones, the Reality Stone. The Dark Elves are being awakened. And are looking to basically plunge the universe into darkness. And the ether ends up in Jane Foster. So the elves go after her to try and get it out from her. They end up killing Thor's mom. And then Thor basically teams up with Loki to save Jane and the universe. And there you go.
Sums it up.
That's the plot. So tell me a little bit about, what specifically stands out to you from this movie? Anything major?
There was plot holes for me that stuck out, to be honest.
Big time.
That I think I will be honest, I probably only watched this movie maybe one other time after its release. So this is maybe the third, I'll even say fourth at most time I've watched it.
Sure.
So there was so many plot holes that did bother me a little bit.
Yeah.
Being a comic book fan, I love the Infinity Gems. I love the whole Thanos quest. So it was odd to me that they made it a liquid for this stone, which was
weird.
A weird concept. Like, why couldn't we just keep it as a stone? That was in my mind, a whole
well, clearly they wanted it to basically act like an infection with Jane Foster, and so it's kind of hard. Like, what does she have to swallow? I
shoved up your nose.
I get why they did it for the cinematic reason. But it's weird.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a cool effect. I mean, the effect still kind of holds up pretty well, I would think.
Some of it.
There were some scenes that you're right. You could really tell, I think we cut some of the budget right about here.
Well, and, I try not to, I don't want to be too negative, but, Natalie Portman is mailing in this performance. Like, she's got so many stamps on it. She went down to the post office herself. She's like, here, take this, because, man... And I thought her and Chris Hemsworth really worked very well in the first Thor.
Right.
There were reports that, Kenneth Branagh, who's like a respected Shakespearean director, did the first Thor movie, and that was really, according to a lot of reports, is what attracted Natalie Portman to the role. She wanted to work with that type of director, and so there were a lot of reports that she wasn't crazy excited about coming back for the sequel. Ooh. She wasn't necessarily on board with what they were having her do, which I totally understand, because that character, in the first movie, she's very, she's driving a lot of what's going on with the plot. And in this movie, she's just basically having things happen to her and having to be saved. And
the damsel distress, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in the final climax, she gets a couple of things to do, but for the most part, I can understand. as an actress going, man, this really isn't a challenging role.
Yeah.
I'm not super excited about working with the director again. You know, she famously, you know, was kind of ripped apart for her role in, you know, the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Mm-hmm. So you can understand her kind of hesitation with, you know, being part of a giant franchise again.
Yeah.
But to me, you sign the contract, you're in the movie. I would prefer if you gave a really
exactly, especially when you know this is on your career now. So like, if anyone looks back, oh, let's look at some of the old movies she's done. Oh, well, what?
Other performances or standout scenes. What else stood out to you?
Honestly, Loki.
Yeah.
This was like, I mean, I like Loki. I've had issues with him up to this point though. You know, the character, he is the god of mischief. That's supposed to be his role. You know, I want the throne kind of thing's been always there. You know, I deserve to be king. And this one, they finally knocked him off his pedestal, actually. You know, I mean, they literally just cut his knees out, and it's just like, cool, here you are now.
Yeah.
I loved it, and I think he sold it. He really made me feel for that character finally. You know, Chris Hemsworth does a great job as Thor.
Yeah.
You know, he's always great.
Yeah.
You know, I did like... Darcy. I like her in this one.
Kat Dennings.
More. Yes, her I liked a little bit more. I think she kind of finally almost blossomed a little bit. Like she got a little more showtime. She got to do a little bit more. So it's like, okay, you're getting there. You're still that annoying person. But you're at least coming out a little bit more. And I think she's cute. I think she has she has potential.
Yeah.
I didn't like what they did with the character for Eric's character though.
Yeah,
I had so many issues with that.
Obviously, they kind of. They build on, well, he had, you know, a god in his head, you know, and so is he having side effects from that? Well, they never show Hawkeye having side effects from that. Exactly. So, you know, then that would be an inconsistency. And so really it's more of just, you know, he's going, you know, he's like mad scientist because he's got all these readings about the convergence happening and nobody believes him, so he's going nuts. Like, yeah it's weird.
Like, to me, it's like, okay, it's cool if he's going nuts. Why do we have to have him running around naked at Stonehenge? That was like a useless little thing. It's like, just have him running. Funny. It was so pointless though, because it's like you can do crazy. He doesn't need to be naked doing it.
Well, and then we got to get our Stan Lee cameo in.
I mean, yeah, they do get your Stan Lee cameo. Can I have my shoe back?
Right, yeah. So yeah, I would agree. I think Tom Hiddleston as Loki is definitely the biggest standout from the movie. I think pretty much everyone else does a good job. You know, the villain Malekith is completely forgettable. You know, everything with the villains in this movie is pretty boring.
They are.
That being said, I like some of the action scenes. The action scene on the Dark Elves world with Thor and Loki, where, you know, it's kind of that trick where you think Loki's betraying Thor.
Yes.
I think that's a pretty cool scene.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a cool moment for Loki as well, where he kills that beast dude.
Oh, yeah.
That's a cool moment where he, like, gets stabbed and, you know, and then, of course, has another fake out. You know, he fakes his death in the first Thor. He fakes his death in this one, too.
I'm going to keep faking my death. They fall for it every time, guys.
Keep working. But yeah, that's a cool scene for sure. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot of scenes that really stand out to me.
No, I really have to agree with you. That's pretty much it. Like, the action scenes are good. Some of them, though. There are some where the main fight between him and the Dark Elf, where they're back on Earth, and like you said, Jane Foster.
End,
that all the background villains were just like walking around, it felt like. It's like, what? Why don't you guys have guns? We've shown you have guns that take down Asgardians. You could just shoot her.
There's like no threat from any of the Dark Elves. Like it just feels very generic and very non-threatening. And they play a lot of those moments like for comedy, which some of it works really well. Like the opening scene where, you know, he's fighting the rock monster and he just like crushes him with one swing and he just goes, anyone else? And everyone's like, no, we're good.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of funny.
Should have killed the big one first. Start with the big one.
Right. But that line is not funny. Like, it's funny because he goes, anyone else, and everyone, and then you get the button on it where it's like, oh, we should start with the big one next time, and you're like, yeah, you killed the joke. Like, you
finished it.
Like, you didn't need that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think one of the other standout scenes for me is the sequence where they're escaping Asgard.
That one was good,
where they go through each one of the Warriors 3 and the Lady Sif, kind of helping them, and you also get a great cameo from Chris Evans, who in the MCU is the king of cameos, because we get his great cameo in Spider-Man where he's giving the instructional videos.
Right.
And in this one,
Loki
turns into him and he's like, I can feel the righteousness surging through me.
Do you want to discuss?
Yes. Yeah, a rousing discussion about patriotism. You know, like, that's a really, like, I think Chris Evans gives an awesome cameo.
He does. Really cool. And you're right, that's a fun scene. How the hell did we fix the Rainbow Bridge?
It's not explained. It just gets fixed.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
I'm serious. You probably just look over there and see all the duct tape.
It took some time, but it's fixed now.
And that's all you get.
And Jane's like, where have you been? Well, I've been saving the universe. You know, it's just like...
I saved all 9 realms. How long's the bridge been fixed?
Like, you couldn't pop down for like one night and tell her?
Right? And that's what I'm saying. Like, there's so many holes because it's like, yeah, I'm saving the realms. All she had to do is like, well, how long was the bridge fixed? I don't know, like a few months. So...
Yeah. And, you know, obviously it actually starts a really funny trend for me, which, you know, going back and watching it again, it's like, oh, like the Asgardians just lie about the past all the time.
Oh, yeah. They really do.
So, anyways, I think the movie's pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's not very memorable.
No.
There's definitely some cool stuff. Again, Loki's really cool. You know, there's a lot of unexplained stuff. Like, at the end of this movie, he's sitting on the throne of Asgard, and they don't explain what happened to Odin until Thor Ragnarok comes around, which is multiple movies away. Like, we get no explanation for where Odin is, what's been going on in the 9 realms. The next time we see Thor, he's in Avengers Age of Ultron. Right. He's been staying on Earth and basically ignoring everything going on in the 9 realms with Loki on the throne. So how much mischief is happening?
Right, and that's also after in this one how he's stressed, I have to save the 9 realms. I have to protect them and this and that. Yep. Next Avengers movie. How long have you been here? Oh, like a couple of years. Just what happened to
been hanging out with Jane, you know?
No, we broke up, remember. So,
well, that's in Age of Ultron, they're still together.
Oh, I thought they broke up in Age of Ultron.
No. In Age of Ultron, they're still together. It's not till Ragnarok that he says that they're broke up. So,
you know, and like, I don't know. I've also had a problem with Eccleston. I've never liked him as an actor.
Well...
And in this, he didn't do anything for me.
Yeah, he's had a couple of roles that I don't mind. But in this movie, not only is he given nothing to do, but he also does nothing with it. Like he's very wooden. It's a very wooden performance.
It's like you said, like how she like mailed in her role. He kind of did the same thing. It felt like he didn't do anything. No, nothing at all. And like you said, he was also given nothing. So I guess nothing equals nothing. So
yeah, it you know, again, if you come to this movie for the villains, you'll be disappointed. Oh, yeah. If you come to it for Loki and Thor,
yeah,
you know, you'll probably have a good time.
Yeah.
So. What about rewatching it now? You said, you know, this is the 3rd or 4th time you've seen it. So did this change your opinion at all? How do you feel about the movie now?
So I know I said this off camera. I did like it more than I originally remember it.
Okay.
So I will give it that. I did like some of the visual effects. I liked the scene where Jane's literally like popping his arms off and all that. I was like, that's kind of cool looking. Yeah. Like that's a nice little effect. I've always said I'm more of like I like the cinematography behind it with like the graphic work. So I enjoyed a little bit more of it, but again, there are those scenes where you can clearly tell the budget was cut for some reason right here or right here. Or maybe it's a re-edit. So I enjoyed it a little bit more than I remember, you know, years ago watching it originally.
Sure. I would say for me, Loki and Tom Hiddleston is really what stood out this time.
Yes.
In rewatching it, like I've seen this movie a few times, but it's not one that I return to a lot.
Exactly.
And so I think for me, this was like, oh man, Tom Hiddleston is really good as Loki. Like this got me re-excited for the Loki spin-off show that they're doing on Disney Plus. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I really want Loki again. I want more Loki all the time. Overall, you know, the movie is okay. Yeah. It's not great. It's you know, probably up to this point, it's on par with about Iron Man 2. Like, it's, you know, like, it's okay. It's certainly not one of the best entries of the MCU. Yeah. But, you know, overall, I think it's pretty good. Okay. So, anyways, you know, as we get into now, we are in the Infinity Saga. So, how does this movie itself fit into the overall arc? We talked a little bit earlier, but how do you feel about how does it fit into the overall arc? You know, is it something that... you know, if you were watching the Infinity Saga, you said, I gotta watch this movie because it really explains a lot.
I still think it is essential because, again, this is still the Reality Stone, which in Avengers Infinity War does play a big part a couple of times.
It's used so differently.
It is.
Like, this movie does not really play into the fact that it's like you can retcon it and say like the reality that Malekith wanted to bring about was one of darkness. Mm-hmm. But that's really not. He never talks about that.
No,
like it's not. It's just like at least the way it's presented in this movie, it's a tool to bring about darkness.
Yeah, because it's like they don't know.
Yeah, so it's weird.
And I liked it though because it gives you an idea of what power is out there, and how destructive it can be. You know, we know about the Tesseract, but in Avengers we saw it as here's this army coming to help Loki rule the world, and that's all it did. Yeah. But now we have something that's like this could literally destroy the realms. Like, okay, this is a little more interesting, a little more powerful. So I still think it's essential because it shows off the power they have. It does do great character development for Loki and Thor, and to a small extent, I even want to say to Odin himself. You know, he kind of learned his own little more humiliation because, spoiler, especially big spoiler in this one, his wife dies. You know, she does get killed off. But I loved her fight scene, by the way. I thought that was a cool thing for her. But her dying, he kind of like takes a step back to himself, I think, just to like, yeah, well, you know what? I don't want to. Like he even said, I don't want to fight you, Thor. Like we're done arguing. This is pettiness, and let's keep going. Like
it's really interesting because you know he does return in Thor Ragnarok, but it's he's not really Odin anymore. Like he's been turned mortal at that point, and so this is kind of the last performance we get of Odin, and it's really interesting to watch it with Thor Ragnarok having been released, where you're like, oh yeah, Odin kind of dumb messed up like a lot. Like, and he kind of messes up a lot in this movie. Like you understand why Thor keeps wanting to do kind of go against Odin, because you're like, yeah, Odin's not thinking this through. He's saying like, well, let's keep it here, and we know they'll attack us here, and we'll be prepared for them. And it's like, yeah, but how many of your people will die?
As many as needed.
Right, and he's like defiant, like, and it's actually, it struck me as really weird during that conversation with Odin and Thor, where Thor says, well, then what makes you different from him? The difference is that I will win. And it's like, is that the only difference that you see there, Odin?
Are you okay?
That might not be good enough. Like, you need more to differentiate yourself from a guy who's trying to destroy the universe.
Yeah, because there was a couple scenes too like that. That's what I said. To a small extent, I want to say Odin, because like I really don't think we don't see that the full character come back around until Ragnarok, like you said. Now having that knowledge, but he did grow a little bit. I mean, his wife still got killed.
Yeah, I think, and that's before that happens. I think so. By the next time we see him in Ragnarok, I think he has kind of had, he's regret, and he's definitely had some growth. In terms of the Infinity Saga, this movie really does give you a lot of background on Thor, and especially where he ends up in both Infinity War and Endgame. I mean, you think of all that character suffers and loses in Infinity War, and also then how he's reacting to that in Endgame. This plays a major role in that as well. So I definitely do think it does tie into the Infinity Saga. But I will say the Infinity stuff is mostly explained. It's explained a lot in Age of Ultron and Endgame. Everything that kind of goes on with the Infinity Stones and the Ether. And so if you skip this movie, I don't think you're going to be lost. There's just a couple things that won't be as powerful.
I can give you that. I can see that. That makes sense.
But we've talked about it for a while. Yes. We've both said it's mostly good. We've talked about what we like, what we don't like. What's your rating? How would you rate Thor: The Dark World?
See, and this is where I do get because you got Tom Hiddleston knocked it out of the park.
Yep.
But then you got Eccleston brought it back. It's like he shoots here and then he brings it back down.
Yep.
You got Chris Hemsworth, does a great job. But then you got Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
Brings it back down. You got Anthony Hopkins' character, who I think did well. He always does well to me. In any role he's in, he commands.
And Rene Russo is really good. I think a lot of the supporting cast is really good.
Yeah.
I think it's well acted, except for probably Eccleston and Portman.
Yeah. And that's what sucks, because those are supposed to be our big characters, and we got nothing from them.
Two of the main cast.
Even his little, henchman that he turned into this big badass creature was I forgot all about that character too. And it's like you didn't do anything with that. So
well, he's also in a mask the whole time. So there's really nothing.
Almost right down the middle. I'd give it a 5.5, because it's still I'm all about villains. I love villains.
Sure.
I love having that character eat away at our hero. And Eccleston didn't do crap for that.
Yeah.
Hiddleston did more to Thor than Eccleston did, and
Sure.
technically Loki at this point is semi-good, semi-bad.
I mean,
we don't know where he's at
He's
yet.
the god of mischief.
Yeah,
like that's
which is
what he's doing.
should be.
He's playing both sides. He's trying to survive. He's not outright trying to kill Thor most of the time, but he's also not necessarily on Thor's side.
Exactly.
No, I will say the one thing that they did, I guess cleverly, if you want to say, is because the complaint at this point, as all of these movies were happening and we'd had the Avengers, people are like, well, why aren't other Avengers showing up? Like in Iron Man 3, why is it just Iron Man?
Yeah.
Why didn't anyone else show up? Where's Hulk? Where's Captain America? Where's Black Widow? Where's Hawkeye? Why aren't they in this movie? In this movie, it almost exclusively takes place off Earth. It really only shows
Which
up...
saves it.
Right.
Yeah.
It really only shows up on Earth for like the final climax, which happens very quickly. So... those characters wouldn't necessarily be able to get there in time.
Yeah, Hawkeye's not going to be on Asgard for whatever. Why am I here, guys?
Yeah. So, my final thoughts, I think I'm going to come in a little bit higher than you. Okay. I think that the Hiddleston and Hemsworth dynamic, I think, works really well in this movie. I think that even though it's not super memorable, I enjoyed watching it. And I thought there were definitely some cool scenes with action. There's definitely some cool stuff. And I think it's pretty funny for the most part as well. There's a few jokes that don't land, but I think overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. So positive movie. It's still a good movie. I still like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely one of the weaker movies in the MCU. Oh, yeah. But it's still again, especially if you compare to like okay, we got like Fantastic Four and Daredevil and Elektra and like all those terrible movies of the 2000s. Like you're like Thor: The Dark World. Yeah, this is awesome.
I mean, if I'm comparing to those, that's number one. I mean, yeah.
So yeah, when you think about the history of comic book movies, this is definitely in the upper echelon, even if it's near the bottom of the MCU.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a testament to how good the MCU has been.
Yeah, that is true.
So, anyways, that's our thoughts on Thor: The Dark World. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Remember to like this video, comment, subscribe. Next time, we're talking about Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Is this maybe the best movie of the MCU? Maybe. Tune in to find out. So, thanks again for joining us, guys. And remember, what keeps you geeky? Let us know.